Hi everyone, it's Little Lessons GCSE Memes here with another video for you. Today looking at Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol and some key quotations from this text to memorise. You might decide to make flashcards about these, maybe do some mind maps, but what I've done is I've selected 10 of my favourite quotations that cover a wide range of characters and themes that would be good to know before you go into your summer examination. Okay, so without further ado, let's have a look at quotation number one. And quotation number one is about Scrooge, when Scrooge himself says, "Every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding." And this is a metaphor used by Scrooge, which really kind of establishes his hatred and his distaste for those who celebrate Christmas because of that noun, idiot, used within it. And straight away we get this sense of him being, you know, quite a grumpy character, for want of a better word. But also, developing that further, there's some veiled violent language which is used here when he talks about boiling people with a pudding. And this kind of veiled language is something that shows he's really uncaring for those people around him. He doesn't care whether they live or die. So this quotation can be taken further than that. And contextually, there's quite an interesting idea behind this as well, because the Victorian society and Victorians in general celebrated Christmas very widely, and it became immensely popular to celebrate Christmas during this time. So the fact that Scrooge doesn't, and he kind of rejects it, makes him quite an atypical character for that time. So that's quotation number one. Quotation number two is also about Scrooge, and it covers his mood through the use of weather. So this symbolic reference here, and he carried his own low temperature with him. And this pathetic fallacy of the weather being cold and dark and quite inactive at the start of the text reflects Scrooge's personality and mood as well. The fact that he himself is melancholic and has a low temperature, emotionally, really shows you what he is like as a character. But this also shows that he brings other people's moods down as well. His coldness reflects upon other people. And Bob is a good example of someone who is around Scrooge a lot, who is affected by Scrooge's moods very much so indeed. And this really contrasts with the weather at the end. The weather is still cold at the end of the text, but instead it's described as something that's quite bracing, something that brings people to life. But it is also lighter and more active as well. So it really does show you how much he transforms when the weather reflects his happiness at the end. So that's quotation number two. Quotation number three is The Ghost of Christmas Past. Now, like I said, I've tried to cover a range of characters, not just Scrooge. And one of the quotes that I like is this one here: "The light that shone out of the Ghost of Christmas Past." And this light imagery used for the Christmas Past ghost shows how he allows other people to see their previous lives quite vividly. He allows them to see what they once did, but it also potentially implies his enlightening side. It might show his purity. There's loads of readings in this as well. So it's a lovely quotation because you can say potentially 3 or 4 different things about why is it that he is described as being kind of light and wearing white as well. Yes, it could be that he's, pure and good. It could be that he's angelic. It could be that he is kind of just allowing people to visibly see their past and learn from it too. Quotation number 4 then. Quotation number 4 is about Scrooge, but it's a quote from another character, Belle, his ex-fiancée. Now, this metaphor, "gain engrosses you," is really, really interesting because of the verb engrosses. Belle seems to be recognising in Scrooge that he's being almost swallowed by his greed. There's nothing else that's important to him. He's kind of being lost within it. And it really does kind of reflect in her this idea of the character Scrooge kind of prioritising his money above everything else. And he selects his money over love, he selects his money over friendship. And she is a character who ultimately recognises that in him. Quotation number 5 then is a quote about the Ghost of Christmas Present now. And I could think of loads of quotations for the Ghost of Christmas Present, but I went for this one here. "Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand." And there's this real big list of immensely positive language used towards the Ghost of Christmas Present. We know that Dickens himself obviously celebrated Christmas and loved Christmas, and his description of the Ghost of Christmas Present as so positive shows you this kind of love of Christmas tradition, as the Ghost of Christmas Present kind of embodies that. And this kind of language of freedom might also be suggestive that, present Christmases, Victorian Christmases, are probably one of the only times that Victorian people get to do what they want and get to have this day of freedom. So it's another reason why it's such a positive description of a character. Particularly when we consider the fact that most days in a Victorian person's life were really repressed, when we think about things like child labour, low wages, poverty. Days like Christmas would have been a rarity and celebrated widely for obvious reasons for most people. Quote 6 then is about Bob and the Cratchits, and actually it's a really surprising quote, and Scrooge himself is surprised to hear this come out of Bob's lips when he sees him celebrating Christmas. And it's, "I'll give you your Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." This quote here, and this exclamation, really does surprise the characters around him, Mrs. Cratchit as well as Scrooge, as he toasts to the person who is able to give him the money to provide this feast for his family. And what it shows is Bob's appreciation for Scrooge in spite of everything, in spite of the way he's treated. And it shows you ultimately that Bob is this kind of really, appreciative, good character. And he really becomes therefore a foil for Scrooge, kind of someone who is really opposing Scrooge, to show you Scrooge's kind of negativity at the start, in this kind of character who has everything to be unappreciative of but still shows his appreciation and positivity. Quote 7 then is a quotation about Tiny Tim said by Bob, and it's "as good as gold." A lovely simple simile here, and this use of gold, this language of value used by Bob, shows you that Tiny Tim is worth a lot to him. Tiny Tim is unable to work because of his disability, but he is worth more to Bob than money would ever provide him. So for that reason, it's a really nice quotation, and this simplistic language really does show the lack of education of these characters perhaps, but also the uncomplexity in the character Tiny Tim, who is just really kind of simply good, a nice appreciative young man. Quote 8 then is a quote by the Ghost of Christmas Future, or about Ghost of Christmas Future I should say, and he is pointing at Scrooge's fate. Scrooge, following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, and this is a really useful quote. The Ghost of Christmas Future is kind of this representation of the Grim Reaper style figure, kind of figure of death, and this sense of foreboding is created by him pointing at Scrooge's own grave. And the adjective neglected in this quotation shows you that Scrooge doesn't change his ways. No one will care about it, the fact of whether he lives or dies at all. Okay, so that's another really useful reason for this quotation. And this is a very Gothic chapter in the text, and do mention that because the Victorians really did like their Gothic fiction and their ghost stories. Quote 9 then is from the final chapter, and it says, "I am happy as an angel, I am as merry as a schoolboy." And these similes are in direct contrast to stave 1. Now we have a happy Scrooge and, like I said, improved weather, the improvement of the descriptions of the weather. These exclamatories are used often in this chapter, and they imply Scrooge's kind of like happiness and the relief that he's able to change his ways as well. And then quote 10, the final quote in the text, "God bless us everyone," a quote said by Tiny Tim and repeated by the narrator. And this imperative to God shows you that the message of this text is to look after everyone and to treat everyone kind of well at Christmas time, and be appreciative. Tiny Tim has the biggest reason to disbelieve in God, yet he is very religious and goes to church himself, and this shows you how good he is as a character and his appreciation for life that we should all have. And because it's the final line in the text, you can also mention this is Dickens' final message, to treat each other nicely. So what you do with these quotations is up to you, whether you make flashcards, do essay paragraphs or mind maps on them. Just do make sure you memorise those for your upcoming examinations. Here's your final meme for today, and I had to get a Grumpy Cat meme in at some point, so there it is. And just be aware that you can still comment or like and subscribe this channel, or check out our Instagram page as well. Thank you very much.